Okay, thank you. Now I have the honor to invite Dr. Kwabena Tandoh, which is the Deputy Director General of the Ghana Education Services, and we have the honor to know now another vision, a vision from a government, how we can move forward. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'll start by answering your question. The young girl is in class 6 or grade 6. All right. Thank you. Well, I'm here to talk to you about a program or a project that we are working with the World Bank on, where we are beginning to look at how do we ensure that our students are learning. And what I would like to first situate you around is that in Ghana we have an education strategic plan for 2018 to 2030 that is encompassed or is situated around the idea of a learning nation. So how do we ensure that as a nation we are learning? And for that matter, in pre-tertiary education, which is the responsibility of the Ghana Education Service, how do we ensure that we are a learning organization? And if we are a learning organization, how do we ensure that our regions and our districts, our circuits and our schools are all learning entities of that organization? And when we are all learning entities, how do we ensure that that learning is happening for our students who are sitting in our classrooms? Because students like Letitia are going to be an important piece of what we are going to be as a nation in the next 15, 20, 25 years and into the future. So I would like to talk to you about GALOP, as we like to call it, where we are galloping or we are leapfrogging, as our Deputy Minister had mentioned earlier. How do we gallop and ensure that we are using accountability as a form of learning? In working on this project, we have a project development objective that is looking at how do we improve quality in low-performing basic schools and strengthen the education sector in general around accountability. And now this is important because we, as a country, if you look at basic education, we have done very well. We still have some work to do, but we have done very well in terms of access and providing access to our students to get into our classrooms in order for learning to take place. We have done also very well, especially around secondary education with the introduction of the free senior high school that is improving access to education. But now we want to be able to look at the quality part of education. If we have the students in the classrooms, how do we ensure that they have quality education and that quality education is impacting on the society in general? So with this project, we are looking at targeting about 10,000 schools that are disadvantaged, and we are looking at a number of criteria for how we target those 10,000 schools. We are looking at examination performance. We are looking at average class sizes. We are looking at pupil-trained teacher ratios. And then we are also looking at levels of poverty in the particular districts that the project are going to be implemented in. In Ghana, we have 260 districts that are organized around 16 administrative regions. And so the districts that are going to participate in and the schools that are going to be beneficiary schools, these are the criteria that we are using. And we want to ensure that we find a way to improve our systems for accountability and, for that matter, for learning. The project is a 5-year project. Technology will find a way to fail you. But anyway, the project is a 5-year project. It's about $174 million, of which $150 million is it's finally working. Of which $150 million is IDA, or of coming from the World Bank over that 5-year period. And 23 or 24 million of that money is coming from GPE as a grant to that project. When technology fails, you go to. The project has 4 components, and I will go ahead and discuss the 4 components. The first component of the project is looking at strengthening teaching and learning through support of resources. And what do we mean by strengthening of teaching and learning through support resources? Under that component, we have 3 subcomponents. One is going to be looking at teacher capacity building and innovative delivery in-service training for our teachers. Number 2, we are going to be looking at school-based support for instructional leadership. We do know that in order for learning to happen, you need to have strong leadership. And so we are going to spend some time to look at school-based support and instructional leadership, and then provide teaching and learning materials and quality teaching and learning materials into our classrooms to ensure that there is learning happening in our schools. Under component 2, we are going to be strengthening school support and management and resources. And under that component, we are looking at a couple of subcomponents. Subcomponent number 1 is going to be looking at learning grants and improvement as a form of improvement in learning outcomes. What do we mean by learning grants? We are going to provide, in addition to capitation grants that happen at every school, additional learning grants, but these grants are going to be specifically targeting activities that schools will do to ensure that learning is happening. And so we are going to support the schools to ensure that they are planning the right kind of things to support learning in their schools. Number 2, we are going to be looking at strengthening our district offices to support our schools. And so how do we ensure that we strengthen the district offices that have supervision in the schools in their district, in the area of management, and in the area of supporting the schools around instructional leadership and capacity building. And then 3, we do have good evidence to show that when the entire community is involved in learning, learning is improved. And so as part of this component, we are going to be looking at SMCs or school management committees to ensure that we have greater citizenry involvement in learning in our schools as a form of improving learning. Then in component number 3, we are looking at strengthening the systems itself for accountability and for learning. Now, we have systems that are in place. We do have systems, but we want to ensure that those systems actually work. How do you ensure that when you have a responsibility, that responsibility is actually being done? So we are going to be looking at the relationships between actors, and then what are we responsible for and who are we responsible to, and then ensure that those systems are strengthened. We are doing that through the development of an accountability framework, and that accountability framework, again, is around learning. And then we are also going to look at the development of an assessment framework for our curriculum, and to ensure that that assessment framework and that strategy is focused on learning. Then on top of that, we are under that same component, we are looking at how do we strengthen and improve our policies around teacher deployment, teacher development, and of course, teacher movement of teachers to ensure that it supports learning. Then under component 4, we are looking at technical assistance and institutional strengthening, monitoring, and research. In this project, which we hope will become institutionalized in the way we do things at the Ghana Education Service, it is important that through the life of the project and beyond that project, we are researching and we are understanding the implementation and ensuring that what we are doing is actually having impact. And so we're going to be spending some time doing impact evaluations on the implementation strategy to ensure that we learn the right things for beyond the project. Now, there are areas around the project development objective that I would like to discuss. Number one is that we want to ensure that we increase the teaching practices in terms of what our inspection standards have been set up, and look at how increased percentage in teaching practice in our targeted schools. Second, we want to look at how students benefit from the direct interventions and enhanced learning. And we want to look at this, looking at disaggregation for gender, as well as areas of advantage and disadvantage. We also want to ensure that this project development objective, one of the indicators we are looking at is how do you increase percentage for targeted KG and primary schools with pupil-trained teacher ratio below 50. We do know that when you have more trained teachers in our schools, that it improves learning. So how do we ensure that we increase our trained teachers in our schools and we reduce the ratio between pupil and trained teacher in our schools, especially in our KG and primary schools? And then how do we increase the number of schools that are using the accountability dashboard data during their cluster level meetings? Now, one of the key areas of this project is that we are going to be developing an accountability dashboard. And it is not just a dashboard, just for dashboard's sake, but we are going to be collecting data around learning and then feeding it into a dashboard. But really, we want to ensure that that data is used for effective and data-driven decision making. How do you ensure that your schools are making decisions based on learning, and that the schools are putting resources in the right areas based on learning? A good example is that at the Ghana Education Service at the headquarters, we have limited resources. And so if we have limited resources, how do we ensure that we do targeted professional development? Instead of saying that we are going to do mathematics training for every teacher in the country, based on the data that we receive on learning, we may realize that maybe it's only 72% of our teachers who really need additional support. So that with our limited resources and the data that we receive, we are able to make decisions that would actually impact the type of support that we provide to our school to maximize learning. And so that's very important. Now, there are a number of innovations that we are doing around support for teachers, support for schools, and then support for strengthening the systems. And in terms of support for teachers, we are now implementing a standards-based curriculum. Prior to 2019, Ghana was implementing an objectives-based curriculum, and we are now implementing a standards-based curriculum. So one of the things that we are doing is providing a lot of training and support for our teachers to be able to implement that curriculum effectively. Right now, we've started its implementation between KG and Primary 6. And so in addition to the initial training that we provided for our teachers, just like the Deputy Minister had mentioned earlier, we have also allocated time on our academic calendar to allow teachers the opportunity to actually come together and then to improve themselves and to increase their knowledge base in learning. If you look at our new academic calendar now, we are providing as much as 74 hours in an academic year for teachers to do professional development and training and learning. 40 or 42 hours of that time is during the academic, when students are actually attending school. Every Wednesday, we allow students to go home 1 hour early so that the teachers will take that last hour to establish professional learning communities. And in those professional learning communities, how do you ensure that you improve your strategies and your pedagogical strategies for teaching in your classroom? How do you improve yourself in terms of your curriculum, the new curriculum that we are implementing? And how do you ensure that as teachers, you are discussing areas where there are challenges, especially around learning for students? One of the key things that we like to talk about is that especially around transition areas where students are moving from either KG to lower primary or lower primary to upper primary, how do you create opportunities for our teachers to come together and talk about a transition? what are the expectations of teachers in upper primary when lower primary students are moving in. And so we allow the professional learning communities to discuss some of those areas and work together as professionals to improve learning. Then we have also allocated 4 days out of the year where it is pupil-free day or students do not go to school. And on those days, teachers come to school for the entire day, and those are run by the district based on the needs in the district. And for that entire day, it is a professional development day for teachers and for head teachers. And during that time, teachers are able to come together either in clusters, in groups, or at the district-wide, where they spend the entire day learning and then supporting each other. These are innovative things that we are doing. And in addition to that, we are providing a lot of coaching and mentoring, especially for our head teachers, around instructional leadership and learning. Now, innovative supports that we are providing directly to schools include the provision of the learning grants that I had mentioned earlier, in addition to the capitation grants that go. And also providing effective guidelines to help the schools to make decisions in terms of their utilization of the learning grants. And ensuring that schools are now developing a 3-year school performance improvement plans, or SPIPs as we call it. And also for accountability purposes, schools are signing performance contracts with their district directors in terms of learning in their schools. In addition to that, we are also ensuring that the learning grants that we disperse are not just dispersed, but they are dispersed based on the condition of utilization of that learning grant. And so if a school has a plan in terms of how they are going to utilize their learning grant, we want to ensure that they have actually utilized it in that particular way before subsequent years' disbursements are sent to schools. And then support to our districts to support our head teachers around instructional leadership. And then how do we ensure that SMCs are also very involved, especially around school-based management, accountability, and financial management, as well as resource mobilization. How do you ensure that outside of what schools get, that there is also other strategies that schools can employ in terms of resource mobilization all around learning? Now, in terms of the innovations that we are doing around strengthening of the accountability systems, one is around the accountability for learning framework. Here we are looking at how do we harmonize all of our data collection tools. Within Ghana, we have a lot of data collection tools, and we collect a lot of data, and for the most part, we use that data in silos. And so how do you ensure that you harmonize all of those tools, you share your data in a way that is effective, and then it support all of the major agencies that are part of the implementation arrangement for the GALOP? And how do we ensure that our MS, which is our Education Management Information System, that we fully digitize our MS process. We are in the process of digitizing how we collect data around educational management, but that we fully digitize that, and then we also ensure that our schools are properly mapped for us to be able to see when a child enters a particular school, that we can follow that child all the way through. And then also institutionalization of cluster meetings in terms of, again, improving learning around clusters of schools. Then around our national assessment strategy, how do we develop an assessment tool and test item banking that meets international benchmarks? Those are very critical for us to ensure that the assessments that we provide to our students meet international benchmarks. And in doing this, as part of the GALOP, we are going to initiate an initial national assessment for primary 4 students. As part of the curriculum implementation in general, we are now as a country going to be assessing students for learning in primary 2, primary 4, primary 6, junior high school 2, and senior high school 2. We want to ensure that at very good intervals, we are measuring how our students are doing, not to position the students for who is first and who is last, but rather for us to be able to get the right data to make the right decision in terms of learning interventions that we must provide in our schools. Then around policy reforms for teacher management, we are looking at how do we recruit effective teachers, or how do we recruit smartly, and how do we ensure that we also deploy our teachers in a smart and efficient way to get teachers to where they are actually needed. what type of transfer policy do we put in place, and what type of incentives do we put in place to ensure that our teachers will go to the areas where they are needed. That is really what we are doing in terms of GALOP and the Ghana Accountability for Learning Outcomes. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have a very good presentation, and better than the World Bank was the idea suggested by the World Bank itself to have a presentation from somebody who is coordinating a project and know how to implement this.